Hi, everyone. I'm Shannon Gonter, professional counselor here in Louisville, Kentucky. Thanks for joining us for our Ask Anything series. These are questions that have been asked by you guys, and we're getting them answered by professionals in the field. And today we have Francis Mican here, marriage and family therapist with Northstar Counseling Center. That's in Louisville. Francis has degrees in both social work and in medical ethics and integrates knowledge from both of these areas in the work that she does with individuals, couples, and their families. She really helps integrating all that in by helping them think about different areas of how wellness influences each other, as well as thinking systematically and considering all the ways that our lives are impacted by contexts such as like our families and relationships, jobs, culture, oppression, etc., all the things. If you want to learn more about her, you can go to northstarcounseling.com and then you'll see her name there in the providers tab and reach out to her and to learn more about her. But thank you so much for being here, Francis. We have a pretty good question for you today. It's about election stress, and it's pretty much just asking, like, what do I do? How do I reduce the stress that is going on in the world right now surrounding our kind of upcoming presidential election?
Yeah. So first, thanks for having me. And this is such a good question. And I think like the first thing I want to say about this is I'm hearing a lot of people ask this question, whether it's my clients or my loved ones. This is, I think, a pretty big thing for a lot of people. So just putting that out there, not that that helps knowing that like a lot of other people are in this same boat, but there are a lot of us in this boat. So I guess when I think about like advice that I would give, really what comes to mind for me is that there are a lot of questions that I would ask. So if somebody came to me with this question, and so these are questions that I would encourage anybody to ask of themselves, is first thinking about like, what do you know about yourself? What do you know works when you're stressed? What do you know has helped in the past? And what do you know doesn't work? Because sometimes that information about what isn't helpful is also very important knowledge, right?
Yeah.
So that can also include like who helps and who maybe isn't the best person to reach out to about this. And then I think thinking about times where we have been through major stressors or minor stressors, just starting to reflect on those and ask ourselves like, well, what helped me cope with that? What helped me get through that day? Or like, was there something that helped me just kind of accept it and deal with it? Like recognizing that, yeah, this stress might exist. So if that's not really going anywhere, what can I do to support myself rather than trying to like push that stress away? So sometimes there are those things we can do to like kind of quiet that stress down, but also sometimes it's about learning how to just deal with it. So like I say, I would encourage a lot of kind of self-reflection and question asking, getting curious about what has worked before. I would also encourage people to think about, again, looking at what might help quiet down that stress. Are there things that help you feel like powerful or like you have a little bit of influence? And so that might be recognizing like in my household, we're having conversations about this, or, with my children or with my partner or, whoever, I'm having some kind of big, important conversations. Or it might be recognizing like there's a lot of volunteer opportunities out in the world right now. There's a lot of places where we can connect with other people in our community in this like very large world where a lot of people are sharing some of these concerns. We might be able to kind of use some of our power to like dial down some of that stress a little bit.
Yeah.
Something that I like, again, with the strategies that I like to encourage people to consider, knowing that this might or might not work, right? So there's something called worrying well. And I like to teach people about this idea, which is essentially just that you create space for yourself to worry. So maybe that means like writing this down, kind of like dumping this all out of your brain onto paper, like knowing that our brain doesn't have to hold this and kind of keep ruminating on it, but that we have this on paper can be helpful for some people. Planning a time to really worry, or even to write almost like a contingency plan of like, okay, so if this person brings this topic up and I feel really uncomfortable, here's how I'm going to handle it.
Mhm.
If the election turns out in this way, then here's what I'm going to do to support myself. And maybe even like leaning into that, being a little bit curious, asking ourselves, like, why is this so stressful for me? Sometimes thinking, instead of pushing against it so much, sometimes getting a little bit curious can help and can lead us to some suggestions, because if we understand what is stressing us out, then we can start to address it. I would also encourage people to think about supporting themselves, recognizing again that that doesn't necessarily mean making stressors go away, but giving ourselves tools to cope. And I think it's important to recognize that when we do like self-support or self-care, it's kind of a type of harm reduction, right? So we're reducing the impact of that stress. And when we do that, I think it's important to remember, I learned this in school, I can't take credit for this idea, but that we need to think about prior to a stressor. So maybe we're thinking about the week of the election, the day of the election. We need to think about during that stressor, which might be watching TV, waiting for results to come in. And it's going to be after. It's going to be that day or week, maybe as we're waiting for results to come in, which is possible this year. So recognizing that we need to have those strategies for caring for ourselves might differ in each of those times. And then the fourth one is just the ongoing. So yeah, before, during, after, and then ongoing, that those are different ways of supporting ourselves. And so maybe having a plan for what we can do in each of those times could be helpful.
Yeah.
I also think boundaries are important right now. Again, kind of thinking about like what conversations are we willing to or not willing to have. And I think for people who are working with a mental health professional, bringing this up, if this is something that's stressful to you, I think it's okay to bring up this conversation. So, as you were mentioning in my bio, I like to think about how the world around us affects us. And I think a lot of therapists do. I worry sometimes about putting on blinders and forgetting that. So I would encourage you that if your therapist hasn't directly asked about how some of this larger systemic stuff is impacting you, bring it up. Let them know if this is stressing you out. That doesn't mean talking politics with your therapist, but it does mean talking about how this is impacting you.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you feel safe to talk about your views, that's great. That doesn't mean getting into a debate with your therapist. Hopefully that should be off the table.
Yeah.
So I think that those are some of my big ideas. Again, recognizing like I can't know what's going to work best for somebody else, but maybe some of those questions, maybe some of those ideas can support people in figuring out what helps them the most.
Yeah, I really like that because it really separates like the stress away from like the stressor, because right now, yes, maybe it's the election, politics, pandemic, 2020, what else are you going to throw at us type thing. But how it's showing up in your body is like getting curious about like what has worked for you in the past, like just kind of being able to separate it a little bit so we don't have to just focus on the election and parties and election and all these things. It's like, no, like how is it showing up for me, and getting curious about like what is going to work for you, because it's going to look very different. What works for you, what works for me,
Yeah,
your neighbor. And so just
and like my election stress is different than your election stress. Like I might have assumptions about what's specifically stressful, but I could be totally wrong. So, and I might even be making assumptions about why I'm stressed out, right? Like in any situation. So sometimes remembering to be curious and think like, well, wait, what is really at the heart of this,
yeah. Do you have any suggestions for people? I know sometimes curiosity like trips people up in the way of, sometimes people can ask the question why to be super curious, and then other times the why question has like a punitive or like a pressure ridden space behind it. Do you have any tips for people on like how can we get curious about what works for us, what doesn't work for us, to kind of identify how stress is showing up for us and what we can do with it?
Mm. I'm glad that you bring that up, yeah, because it's important that we be gentle with ourselves when we're stressed, right? Like especially, but and maybe, yeah, so maybe it's having that conversation with somebody who loves you a lot. Like maybe it's talking about this with somebody who's going to be like help you be gentle to yourself. Or maybe it's asking questions, yeah, about maybe focusing more on where have you been successful rather than where have you gotten tripped up in the past. So thinking about your strengths, thinking about what has worked rather than just thinking about like, how can I avoid getting it wrong, or, making things like worse,
Yeah.
know.
Sometimes even having like comfy things around you, like a comfy
Oh,
blanket,
yeah.
something soft, like being able to just create that gentle, safe space.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. Yeah. And yeah, just kind of like sitting with it. But I kind of encourage people when we're dealing with something intense, like just dip into it. You don't have to dive in, but maybe like dip into it for a second. If it feels like too much, don't pressure yourself.
Mhm.
If that curiosity does feel like you're being really harsh towards yourself, yeah, you don't have to spend all day there,
Yeah.
or even a few minutes there. You can recognize like, nope, not the time. And that's okay too. That's, again, just respecting your own boundaries. So
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. I really do hope, definitely help me and hope it helps other people. Uh, as we all know, 2020 has lots of things that are throwing at us. And so being able to deal with the stress is something we've needed all year. And these tips are definitely helpful.
it's something, hopefully, yeah, that we all need like for our whole lives, right? So in a way, looking at situations like this as practice, we're learning about ourselves for our whole existences. So maybe you'll learn something through this really wild roller coaster of a year. I don't
Yep.
know.
Yeah. Well, is there any other kind of just mental health tips or tricks or anything that you'd like to share with the audience before signing off?
I guess I'm going to go back to that sense of like, be gentle with yourself. Things are really tough, and to think that we're not, again, to put those blinders on and think that we're not affected by the stuff around us, or our loved ones being deeply affected by the stuff around us. I think that that's a trap we can fall into, or thinking like, why is this hard for me and not everybody else?
Mhm.
Things are really tough, and things are stressful, and it's okay to feel like things are tough and stressful. And just because we're not hearing it from everybody, that doesn't mean that we're doing anything wrong. It
Yeah.
just means it's hitting us in a particular way.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Well, thank you so much, guys. Remember, if you want to get in contact with Francis, northstarcounselingcenter.com. You'll find her tab on there and be able to read the bio and all the good things. And then if you have a question that you want to get answered by a mental health or wellness professional, just reach out to us and we will get it answered for you. But until next time, enjoy and be safe and be well.
Thanks so much.